Okay, I'm back. I don't know what's wrong with OBS. I'm here. Let me see if I'm still... There we go. Waste welcome in. I think I'm causing bad luck for a lot of streams that happen to another streamer is watching. Spoony? Oh no. No, I don't know what's wrong. It doesn't make sense. But let's continue. Crusader, welcome in. Okay. I don't know where I left off, so I'm gonna... Everyone's internet is trickling. Ugh. I wonder why that is. Okay, I'm going to start at the top of this page. So they're going to Intervale. Townsend, 4 miles. Intervale, 6 miles, read Henry aloud. Anyone feel able to walk 6 more miles? He grinned. No one had the least idea how far they had already walked. We'll go that way, at least, said Jess finally. That we will, agreed Henry, picking up his brother for a change and carrying him pigback. Violet went ahead. The new road was a pleasant woody one, with grass growing in the middle. The children could not see the grass, but they could feel it as they walked. Not many people pass this way, I guess, remarked Violet. Just then she caught her toe in something and almost fell, but Jess caught her. The two girls stooped down to examine the obstruction. Hey, said Jess. Hi, Matsu. How are you? I had to restart stream because OBS crashed. How was your stream? I hope it went well. I hope you did not have any internet issues. Let's see. Oh my goodness. So to everyone who's just come in, before when Waste was here, I was talking about this book. It was published in 1924, and if you count to date, if you include the specials, the side stories, and etc., there are 204 books in this series. 204, and it's apparently still being published today. I didn't realize they were still putting out new books, but it seems like it is current. Okay. Hey, said Jess. She says it Hay. Hey, repeated Violet. Hey, Hey, cried Henry, coming up. What did you say? It must have fallen off somebody's load, said Jess. We'll take it with us, Henry decided wisely. Load on all you can carry, Jess. There's way more than one. Oh, it's a huge series. So, the first one is just the Boxcar children. Right. Oh, apparently there's a film from 2014. Oh, and the link went away. But anyone who wants to read along, there's a free copy of it. Let's see. I was looking for a list of the titles, but there's not. Okay, the Boxcar children have their own website. I should have figured that was a thing. The books, okay. So the first one is the Boxcar Children. The second one is Surprise Island. The Yellow House Mystery. Mystery Ranch. Mike's Mystery. Blue Bay Mystery. If you look at the new Rabbits, if you look at the new covers, it's so obvious that they've been updated to like be more modern now. But yeah, I haven't read I haven't read them in so long. I remember reading the Houseboat Mystery and the Caboose Mystery. And I'm pretty sure the school I've read so many of these. I'm just trying to figure out. Oh, I probably can't see. Oh, that's okay. One of the books sitting right next to you. Oh, which one? I just looked it up. I had no idea, but the author was born in Putnam, Connecticut in 1890. She dreamed of being an author from the age of 5. And she would give her grandfather one of her stories as a Christmas gift. That's cool. Oh, here's another interesting. In 1918, she taught first grade when the male teachers were in World War One. Wait, in 1942 is when the Boxcar Children came out? No, because it's. This is so. Okay, so it was written in 1924. Now I'm confused. Originally. Oh. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this. Okay, we're learning something. So it was originally published in 1924 by Miranda McNally as The Boxcar Children with a hyphen between Boxcar. It was reissued in a shorter, revised form in 1942 by Albert Whitman and Company. So we are reading the original. And um, apparently she only wrote 19 of the books. She's the author. They usually solve a mystery with very little adult intervention. Although the adults are present, the author said she wrote mostly unsupervised children because it would appeal to children. You can't find it. That's okay. The series are divided into mysteries and specials. All of the specials were written after Warner's death. As of 2021, there were 159 mysteries and 21 specials in the series. In 2017, the first Boxcar Children mini-series, and since 2021, 3 more have been written. Creatures of Legend, Endangered Animals, and Summer Adventure. In addition, 2 spin-off series have been released. The first, The Adventures of Benny and Watch, and second, The Jessie Files. Warner read it to her classes and rewrote it many times so the words were easy to understand. Some of her pupils spoke other languages at home and were just learning English, so the Boxcar Children gave them a fun story that was easy to read. Warner once wrote that the original book raised a storm of protest from librarians who thought the children were having too good a time without any parental control. That is exactly why children like it. I love this woman. I had no idea she was this cool. I love that. So we're reading the original unedited version. It's It's Warner. Did I put Warren? Oh no, I did. There we go. I updated that. Yeah. My brain isn't writing now. They're the same letters, just wrong order. Okay. So they're gonna carry the hay. For Benny, thought Violet to herself. So the odd little party drudged on for nearly 3 hours, laden with hay, until they found that the road ended in a cart path through the woods. My brain is in anagram mode, that is a fact. "Oh dear," exclaimed Jess, almost ready to cry with disappointment. "What's the matter?" demanded Henry in astonishment. "Isn't the woods a good place to sleep? We can't sleep in the road, you know." "It does seem nice and far away from people," admitted Jess, "and it's almost morning." As they stood still at the entrance to the woods, they heard the rumble of a train. It roared down the valley at a great rate and passed them on the other side of the woods, thundering along toward the city. "Never mind the train either," remarked Henry. "It isn't so awfully near, and even if it were, it couldn't see us." He set his brother down and peered into the woods. It was very warm. "Listen," said Benny. "Listen," echoed Violet. "More water," Benny cried, catching his big brother by the hand. "It is only another brook," said Henry with a thankful heart. "He wants a drink." The trickle of water sounded very pleasant to all the children as they lay down once more to drink. Benny was too sleepy to eat. Jess quickly found a dry spot thick with moss between two stones. Upon this moss, the three older children spread the hay in the shape of an oval bed. Benny tumbled into it with a great sigh of satisfaction, while his sisters tucked the hay around him. "Pine needles up here, Jess," called Henry from the slope. Each of them quickly scraped together a fragrant pile for a pillow, and once more lay down to sleep with hardly a thought of fear. "I only hope we don't have a thunderstorm," said Jess to herself as she shut her tired eyes. She did not open them for a long time, although the dark gray clouds piled higher and more thickly over the sleeping children. Shelter. When Jess opened her eyes, it must have been about 10 o'clock in the morning. She sat up and looked all around her. She could see dimly the opening where they had come into the woods. She looked around to see that her family was still safely by her. Then she looked up at the sky. At first she thought it must still be night, and then she realized that the darkness was caused by an approaching storm. Whatever shall we do now?" demanded Jess of the air. She got up and looked in every direction for shelter. She even walked quite a little way into the woods and down a hill. And there she stood, not knowing what to do next. "I shall have to wake Henry up," she said at last, "only how I hate to." As she spoke, she glanced into the forest, and her feet felt as if they were nailed to the ground. She could not stir. Faintly outlined among the trees, Jess saw an old freight or boxcar. Her first thought was one of fear. Her second, hope for shelter. As she thought of shelter, her feet moved, and she stumbled toward it. Really, I was too. I told my mom that I was going to run away and live in a boxcar, and she was like, "Okay, have fun, bye." Clearly, I did not do that. But apparently my mother had said the same thing to my grandmother. And it's funny to me to think about this book because if you think about it, not only did me and my mom definitely read it, my grandmother could have read it, and my great-grandmother could have read it as well. It's 4 generations, and the books are still popular and still being sold in bookstores. Like, you can go to the bookstore right now and you will find the Boxcar Children there in the kids section, guaranteed. It's just a classic, an enduring classic. It really was a freight car. She felt of it. It stood on rusty, broken rails, which were nearly covered with dead leaves. Then the thunder cracked overhead. Jess came to her usual senses and started back for Henry, flying like the wind. He was awake, looking anxiously overhead. He had not noticed that Jess was missing. "Come," panted Jess. "I found a place. Hurry, hurry." Henry did not stop to ask questions. He picked up Benny, telling Violet to gather up the hay. And then they ran headlong through the thick underbrush in Jess's wake, seeing their way only too well by the sharp flashes of lightning. It's beginning to there it is. It's beginning to sprinkle, gasped Henry. We'll get there all right, Jess shouted back. It's not far, but be all ready to help me open the door when we get there. By sheer good fortune, a big tree stump stood near the door of the freight car, or the children never could have opened it. As it was, Jess sprang on the stump, and Henry, pausing to lay Benny down, did likewise. Together they rolled back the heavy door about a foot. That's enough, panted Jess. I'll get in, and you hand Benny up to me. No, said Henry quietly. I must see first if anyone is in there. It will rain, protested Jess. Nothing will hurt me. But she knew it was useless to argue with Henry, so she hastily groped in the bag for the matches and handed them to her brother. It must be confessed that Jess held her breath while Henry struck one and peered inside the car. All's well, he reported. Come in, everybody. Violet passed the hay up to her brother and crawled in herself. Then Jess handed Benny up like a package of groceries, and taking one last look at the angry sky and waving trees, she climbed in after him. The two children managed to roll the door back so that the crack was completely closed before the storm broke. But at that very instant it broke with a vengeance. It seemed to the children that the sky would split, so sharp were the cracks of thunder. But not a drop of rain reached them in their roomy retreat. They could see nothing at all, for the freight car was tightly made, and all outside was nearly as black as night. Through it all, Benny slept on. I admire this kid's ability to just sleep through everything. Presently the thunder grew fainter and rumbled away down the valley, and the rain spent itself. Only the drip from the trees on the top of the car could be heard. Then Henry ventured to open the door. He knelt on his hands and knees and thrust his head out. The warm sunlight was filtering through the trees, making golden pools of light here and there. The beautiful trees, pines and white birches and oaks, grew thickly around, and the ground was carpeted with flowers and wonderful ferns more than a yard high. But most miraculous of all was a miniature waterfall, small but perfect, where the little brown brook fell gracefully over some ledges and danced away down the glen. In an instant, Jess and Violet were looking over Henry's shoulder at the pretty sight. How different everything looks with the sun shining, exclaimed Jess. Things will soon be dry at this rate. It must be about noon, observed Henry, looking at the sun, and as he spoke the faint echo of mill bells in the distance was heard. Henry, said Jess sharply, let's live here. Live here, repeated Henry dully. Yes, why not? Replied Jess. Nobody uses this car, and it's dry and warm. We're quite far away, and yet we are near enough to a town so we can buy things. And we're near water, added Violet. Jess hugged her sister. So we are, little mouse, she said. The most important thing of all. But, began Henry. Please, Henry, said Jess excitedly. I could make this old freight car into the dearest little house with beds and chairs and a table and dishes. I'd like to live here too, said a determined little voice from the corner. But I don't want to unless... Unless what? Asked Henry, panic-stricken. Unless I can have my dinner, Benny finished anxiously. We'll have something to eat right away, old fellow, said Henry, thankful it was no worse, for he himself was beginning to see what a cozy home the car really could make. Jess cut the last loaf of bread into 4 pieces, but alas, it was very dry. The children were so hungry that they tore it with their teeth like little dogs, but Benny was nearly crying. He did not actually cry, however, for just at the crucial moment, Violet started a funny story about Cinnamon Bear eating bread crusts out of the ash can. He ought to have milk, said Jess quietly to Henry. He shall have milk, replied Henry. I'll go down the railroad track to the town and get some. Jess counted out $1 and 10 dimes and handed it to Henry. By the time our $4 are gone, you will have some work to do, she said. All the same, Henry did not like to begin his trip. How I hate to leave you alone, Jess, he said miserably. Oh, don't you worry, began Jess lightly. We'll have a surprise for you when you come back. Just wait and see. She nodded her head wisely as Henry walked slowly off through the woods. The moment he was out of sight, she turned to Benny and Violet. Now, children, she said, what do you think we're going to do? Do you know what I saw over in the sunny part of the woods? I saw some blueberries. Oh, oh, cried Benny, who knew what blueberries were. Can't we have some blueberries and milk? We certainly, began Jess. But the sentence never was finished, for a sharp crackle of dry leaves was heard. Something was moving in the woods. Blueberry scene. I don't know why that just made me think of the book Blueberries for Sal. Another classic. A New Home. Keep still, whispered Jess. Benny obeyed. The three children were as motionless as stone images huddled inside the freight car. Jess opened her mouth in order to breathe at all. Her heart was thumping so wildly. She watched like a cat through the open door in the direction of the rustling noise, and in a moment the trembling bushes parted, and out crawled a dog. He was an Airedale, and he was pulling himself along on 3 legs, whimpering softly. Airedale Terriers are kind of cute. Jess drew a long breath of relief and said to the children, It's all right, only a dog, but he seems to be hurt. At the sound of her voice, the dog lifted his eyes and wagged his tail feebly. He held up his front foot. Poor doggy, murmured Jess soothingly as she clambered out of the car. Let Jess see your poor lame foot. She approached the dog carefully, for she remembered that her mother had always told her never to touch a strange dog unless he wagged his tail. But this dog's tail was wagging, certainly, so Jess bent over without fear to look at the paw. An exclamation of pity escaped her when she saw it, for a stiff, sharp thorn had been driven completely through one of the cushions of the dog's foot, and around it the blood had dried. I guess I can fix that, said Jess briskly, but taking the thorn out is going to hurt you, old fellow. The dog looked up at her as she laid his paw down and licked her hand. Come here, Violet and Benny, directed Jess. She took the animal gently in her lap and turned him on the side. She patted his head and stroked his nose with one finger and offered him the rest of her bread crust, which she had put in her apron pocket. The dog snapped it up as if he were nearly starved. Then she held the soft paw firmly with her left hand and pulled steadily on the thorn with her right hand. The dog did not utter a sound. He lay motionless in her lap until the thorn suddenly let go and lay in Jess's hand. Good, good, cried Violet. Wet my handkerchief, Jess ordered briskly. Violet did so, dipping it in the running brook. Jess wrapped the cool, wet folds around the hot paw and gently squeezed it against the wound, the dog meanwhile trying to lick her hands. We'll surprise Henry, won't we? Laughed Benny delightedly. Now we got a dog. To be sure, said Jess, struck with the thought. But that isn't what I intended for a surprise. You know I was intending to get a lot of blueberries and maybe find some old dishes in a dump or something. Can't we look while you hold the dog? Asked Violet anxiously. Oh, hello, Grandma Gracie. Welcome in. Thank you for the raid. Let's bring Apple out to say hello. How are you? How was your stream? I hope it went well and that you had fun. Apple's just chilling. We are reading the Boxcar Children. It was originally published in 1924. You made a TV for the bedroom and watched Sharks videos. Oh, cool. Right? So I've been telling everyone that comes in when I first read this, when I was like 6, 7, 8, however old I was. I told my mom I was going to run away and live in a boxcar, and she was like, okay, have fun, bye. Which apparently she also told my grandmother. So, like mother, like daughter. But yeah, I love this book. So this book, everyone who just came in, if you're interested, there's a link to a free copy of the book on Project Gutenberg. It is the original. So The book was originally published in 1924. That's the version we're reading. However, in 1942, it was republished with Albert Whitman, I think it said it was, company, and shortened. It was like condensed a little bit. So this one's, obviously going to be a little bit different. And there are, if you include the original stories and the spin-offs and specials and miniseries, there are 204 books. I had no idea that there were that many, but I don't think, and I think the author Gertrude Chandler Warner only wrote the first like 19. I know, right? I read so many of these as a kid, but I do not remember. Obviously, not all of them were published at the time. Gertrude Chandler Warner. Yeah, it's the only one on the website. So the second and third weren't written until the 40s. However, she does have another book we can read after this that's on there called The House of Delight. And then there's Life's Minor Collisions. Interesting. This one's probably a no. Oh, it's humor, but it's essays. We might be able to read it. We might check it out. That seems interesting. Okay, let's continue with the reading. Switch over Apple. Here we go. Can't we look while you hold the dog? Asked Violet anxiously. Of course you can, pet, said Jess. Look over there by those rocks. Benny and Violet scrambled through the underbrush to the place Jess pointed out and investigated. But they did not hunt long, for the blueberries were so thick that the bushes almost bent over with their weight. Oh, Jessie, screamed Benny, you never saw so many in your life. What'll we pick 'em into? Come and get a clean towel, said Jess, who noticed that Benny was already picking into his own mouth. But that's just as well, she thought, because he won't get so hungry waiting for the milk. She watched the two children a moment as they dropped handfuls of the bluish globes on the towel. Then she carefully got up with her little patient and went over and sat down in the center of the patch. The berries were so thick she did not have to change her position before the towel held over a quart. Oh dear, sighed Jess. I wish I could hunt for some dishes so we could have blueberries and milk. Never mind tonight, said Violet. We can just eat a handful of berries and then take a drink of milk when Henry comes. But it was even better than that, for when Henry came he had 2 bottles of milk under one arm, a huge loaf of brown bread under the other, and some golden cheese in waxed paper in his pocket. But you should have seen Henry stare when he saw what Jess was holding. Where in the world? Began the boy. He came to us, volunteered Benny. He came for a surprise for you, and he's a nice doggy. Henry knelt down to look at the visitor, who wagged his tail. Yeah. This was back in 1924, so yeah, they would buy that much. I wouldn't be surprised if he had some change, too. Henry knelt down to look at the visitor, who wagged his tail. It wouldn't be a bad thing to have a watchdog, said Henry. I worried about you all the time I was gone. Did you bring some milk? Inquired Benny, trying to be polite, but looking at the bottles with longing eyes. Bless his heart, said Jess, struggling to her feet with the dog. We'll have dinner right away. Or is it supper? Call it supper, suggested Henry, for it's the last thing we'll have to eat today. And then tomorrow we'll start having 3 meals every day, laughed Jess. It was certainly a queer meal, whatever it was. Jess, who liked above all things to be orderly, spread out the big gray laundry bag on the pine needles for a tablecloth. The brown loaf was cut by a very excited little hostess into 5 thick squares, the cheese into 4. Dogs don't eat cheese, Benny remarked cheerfully. I should tell my dog that dogs don't eat cheese. He will be very devastated to know that. The poor little fellow was glad of it, too, for he was very hungry. He could hardly wait for Jess to set the milk bottles in the center of the table and heap the blueberries in 4 little mounds, one at each plate. I'm sorry we haven't cups, Jess remarked. We'll just have to drink out of the same bottle. No, we won't, said Henry. We'll drink half of each bottle, so that will make at least 2 things to drink out of. Good for you, Henry, said Jess, much relieved. You and Benny use one, and Violet and I will use the other. So the meal began. Look, Benny, directed Henry. Eat a handful of blueberries, then take a bite of brown bread, then a nibble of cheese. Now a drink of milk. It's good, mumbled Benny to himself all through the meal. You must not imagine that the poor wandering dog was neglected, for Jess fed him gently as he lay in her lap, poking morsels of bread into his mouth and pouring milk into her own hand for him to lap up. When the meal was over and exactly half of each bottle of milk remained, Jess said, We are going to sleep on beds tonight, and just as soon as we get our beds made, we are all going to be washed. That'll be fun, Benny, added Violet. We'll wash our paws in the brook just the way Cinnamon does. First, let's gather armfuls of dry pine needles, ordered Jess. Get those on top that have been laying in the sunshine. Jess laid the dog down on a bed of moss as she spoke and started energetically to scoop up piles of the fragrant needles. Soon a pile as high as her head stood just under the freight car door. I think we have enough, she said at last. Taking the scissors from Violet's work bag, she cut the laundry bag carefully into 2 pieces, saving the cord for a clothesline. One of the big squares was laid across Benny's hay and tucked under. That was the softest bed of all. Violet's apron and her own she cut off at the belt. I'll sleep next to Benny, said Henry, with my head up by the door. Then I can hear what is going on. A big pile of pine needles was loaded into the freight car for Henry's bed and covered with the other half of the laundry bag. The remainder of the needles Jess piled into the farthest corner of the car for herself and Violet. We'll all sleep on one side so we can call it the bedroom. What'll be the other side? Inquired Benny. The other side, repeated Jess. Let me think. I guess that'll be the sitting room, and perhaps some of the time the kitchen. On rainy days, maybe the dining room, added Henry with a wink. Couldn't it be the parlor? Begged Benny. Certainly, the parlor. We forgot that, agreed Jess, returning the wink. She was covering the last 2 soft beds with the 2 aprons. The tops of these aprons are washcloths, she said severely. They are then armed with a big cake of soap, she led the way to the brook. The dog watched them anxiously, but when Jess said lie still, he obeyed. From the moment Jess drew the thorn from his foot, he was her dog, to obey her slightest command and to follow her wherever she went. The clean, cool brook was delightful even to Benny. The children rolled up their sleeves and plunged their dusty arms into its waters, quarreling good-naturedly over the soap and lathering their stained faces and necks with it. When they were all rinsed with clear water, they dried themselves with a towel. Then Jess washed both towels nicely with soap, rinsed them, and hung them on the clothesline of tape, which she had stretched between 2 slender birch trees. They flapped lazily in the wind. Looks like home already, Jess, said Henry, smiling at the washing. The tired children clambered into the bedroom, Jess coming last with the wounded dog. We'll have to leave the door open, it's so hot, said Henry, lying down with a tired sigh. And in less than 10 minutes they were fast asleep, dog and all, asleep at 6 o'clock, asleep without naming the dog, without locking the door, without fear, for this was the first night in 4 that they had been able to go to sleep at night, as children should. Housekeeping. The tea I got is so delicious. Am I frozen again? Okay, just a little leg. The next morning, Jess was up before the others, as was fitting for a little housekeeper. That is, she was first if we accept the dog, who had opened one eye instantly every time his little mistress stirred in her sleep. He sat watching gravely in the door of the car as Jess descended to get breakfast. She walked from a little waterfall quite a distance down the brook, looking at it with critical eyes. This will be the well, she said to herself, regarding a small but deep and quiet basin just below the falls. Below that she found a larger basin lined with gravel with flat stones surrounding it. This will be the wash tub, she decided, and now I must get back to the refrigerator. This was the strangest spot of all, for behind the little waterfall was a small, quiet pool in which Jess had set the milk bottles the night before. Not a drop of water could get in, but all night long the cool running water had surrounded the bottles. They were now fairly icy to the touch. Jess smiled as she drew them out. "Is it good?" asked Benny's voice. There he sat in the door of the car, swinging his legs, his arm around the shaggy dog. "It's delicious," declared Jess, "cold as ice." She climbed up beside him as she spoke, bringing the breakfast with her. The other two children sat up and looked at it. "Today, Jess," began Henry, "I will go back to town and try to get a job mowing lawns or something. Then we can afford to have something besides milk for breakfast." Milk suited Benny very well, however, so the older children allowed him to drink rather more than his share. Henry did not waste any time talking. He brushed his hair as well he could without a brush, rolled down his sleeves, and started for town with the second dollar. "Glad you've got a dog, Jess," he called back as he waved his straw hat. The children watched him disappear around the curve and then turned to Jess expectantly. They were not mistaken. Jess had a plan. "Well, Explorer," she began mysteriously, "we'll begin here at the car and hunt all over these woods until we find a dump." "What's a dump?" inquired Benny. "Oh, Benny," answered Violet, "you know what a dump is. All old bottles and papers and broken dishes." "And wheels?" asked Benny interestedly. "Will there be any old wheels?" "Yes, maybe," assented Violet. "But cups, Benny. Think of drinking milk out of a cup again." "Oh, yes," said Benny politely, but it was clear that his mind was centered on wheels rather than cups. "Hello, Melty girlfriend. Welcome to class. Thank you for the follow." The exploring party started slowly down the rusty track, with the dog hopping happily on three legs. The fourth paw, nicely bandaged with Jess's handkerchief, he held up out of harm's way. "I think this is a spur track," said Jess. "They built it in here so they could load wood on the cars. Then, when they had cut all the wood, they didn't need the track anymore." This explanation seemed very likely, for here and there were stumps of trees and decaying chips. Violet took note of these chips and remembered them some days later. In fact, both girls kept their eyes open and pointed out things of interest to each other. "Remember these logs, Violet, if we should ever need any," said Jess, pointing. "Blackberry blossoms," returned Violet briefly, turning one over gently with her foot. "Big flat stones," remarked Jess later on as they came upon a great heap of them. Here the track came out into the open sunshine, and broken pieces of rail showed clearly where it had joined the main track at some time in the past. And here from the top of the wooded hill the children could plainly see the city in the valley. They walked along the track, picking out a church steeple here and there, forgetting for a moment the object of their search. "I love blackberries too. They're my favorite." So where I spend some of the summer with my family, there's blackberry bushes by the driveway. And while I was there, like two or three at a time would ripen. So I would pick them off and eat them. Nobody else in my family was eating them, so I was like, more for me. So I would pick them out and eat them. But if you're familiar with blackberry brambles, they have thorns on them, and I definitely got stuck more than once. And not around me here, but where my family lives, there is a bunch. But I laughed because one year I was so desperate to get the blackberries. There were so many in this one area that I climbed through the fence and was picking them, but I got completely stuck in the brambles. Like the thorns were ripping at my shirt, and I just yelled for help. And my sister comes out laughing hysterically, filming instead of helping. Yeah, they're the ones that we had are they're like the giant ones that are super, super juicy and sweet when they're ripe. It's so good. But yeah, so my sister likes to laugh at me when I was clearly in a state of distress instead of helping me. There's a wheel, Benny cried triumphantly from behind. The girls looked down, and with a glad cry of surprise, Jess recognized a dump at the foot of the hill. They found it not composed entirely of ashes and tin cans either, although both of these were there in great profusion. It was a royal dump containing both cups and wheels. Oh, Benny, cried Jess, if it hadn't been for you. She hugged him, wheel and all, and began turning over the rubbish with great delight. Here's a white pitcher, Jess, Violet called, holding up a perfect specimen with a tiny chip in its nose. Here's a big white cup, said Jess delightedly, laying it aside. Want a teapot, Jessie? Inquired Benny, offering her an enormous blue enameled affair without a handle. Yes, indeed, cried Jess. We can use that for water. I found 2 cups and a bowl already. And Violet, we ought to be looking for spoons, too. Violet pointed without speaking to her little pile of treasures. There were 5 iron spoons covered with rust. Wonderful, pronounced Jess with rapture. Indeed, it is doubtful if collectors of rare and beautiful bits of porcelain ever enjoyed a search as much as did these adventurers in the dump heap. Benny actually found 4 wheels, exactly alike, probably from the same cart, and insisted upon carrying them back. To please him, Jess allowed him to add them to the growing pile. Here's a big iron kettle, observed Violet. But we won't really cook with a fire, will we, Jess? We'll take it back, though, replied Jess with a knowing look. We can pile lots of dishes in it. They could and did, but not until after Benny had discovered his beloved pink cup. Oh, I remember the pink cup. I remember this part. It was a tea party cup of bright rose color with a wreath of gorgeous roses on it, and a little shepherdess giving her lamb a drink from a pale blue brook. It had a perfectly good handle, gold into the bargain. Its only flaw was a dangerous crack through the lamb's nose and front feet. Jess made a cushion for it out of grass and laid it on top of the kettle full of treasures. All the things, even the wheels, were laid on a wide board which the 2 girls carried between them. Can you imagine the dishwashing when the gay party returned to the freight car? Children do not usually care for dishwashing, but never did a little boy hand dishes to his sister so carefully as Benny did. On their hands and knees beside the clear, cool little wash tub, the 3 children soaped and rinsed and dried their precious store of dishes. Jess scoured the rust from the spoons with sand. There, she said, drying the last polished spoon. The children sat back and looked admiringly at their own handiwork, but they did not look long. There was too much to be done. Jess, exclaimed Violet, I'll tell you. Violet seldom spoke so excitedly. Even Benny turned around and looked at her. Come and see what I noticed inside the car last night. Both children followed her and peered in at the door. See, on the wall right over on the other door, Jess. Now all Jess could see were 2 thick chunks of wood nailed securely to the closed door opposite the open one, but she whirled around and around as fast as she could, clapping her hands. When she could get her breath, however, she skipped over to the board they had carried, dusted it nicely, and laid it carefully across the 2 wooden projections. It was a perfect shelf. There, said Jess. The children could hardly wait to arrange the shining new dishes on the shelf. Violet quietly gathered some feathery white flowers, a daisy or 2, and some maidenhair ferns, which she arranged in a glass vase filled with water from the well. This she put in the middle, with the broken edge hidden. There, said Jess. You said there 3 times, Jessie, remarked Benny contentedly. So I did, replied Jess, laughing, but I'm going to say it again. She pointed and said, There! Henry was coming up the path. Earning a living. Henry had all sorts of packages under his arm and in his pockets, but he wouldn't open them or tell a thing about his adventures until dinner was ready. He said, Jess, you're a wonder, he exclaimed when he saw the dishes in the shelf. The big kettle was selected, and they all began to pick blueberries as fast as they could, telling Henry meanwhile all about the wonderful dump. At last the tablecloth was spread, and Henry unwrapped his parcels before the whole excited family. I bought some more brown bread, he said, producing the loaves, and some more milk, in the same little store where I went yesterday. It's kept by a little old man, and he called it a delicatessen shop. He has everything in his store to eat. I bought some dried beef because we can eat it in our fingers, and I bought a big bone for the dog. His name is Watch, Jess interrupted. All right, said Henry, accepting the name. I bought a big bone for Watch. Watch fell on the bone as if he were famished, which indeed he nearly was. It was a rapturous moment when Jess poured the yellow milk into 4 cups or bowls, and each child proceeded to crumble the brown bread into it with a liberal scattering of blueberries. And then when they ate it with spoons. Nobody was able to speak a word for several minutes. Then Henry began slowly to tell his tale. I earned $1 just this morning, he began proudly. I walked along the first shady street I came to. Nice houses, you know. And there was a fellow out mowing his own lawn. He's a nice fellow, too, I can tell you. A young doctor. Henry paused to chew blissfully. He was pretty hot, Henry went on, and just as I came to the gate, his telephone rang. I heard it and called after him and asked if he didn't want me to finish up. And he said he did, cried Jess. Yes, he said, for goodness sake, yes, Henry answered, smiling. You see, he wasn't used to it. So I mowed the lawn and trimmed the edges, and he said he never had a boy trim it as well as I did. Then he asked me if I wanted a steady job. Oh, Henry, cried Jess and Violet together. I told him I did. So he said come back this afternoon any time I wanted or tomorrow. He said he didn't care, just when, any time. Henry gave his cup a last polish with his spoon and set it down dreamily. It's a pretty house, he went on. There's a big garden behind it, vegetable garden, and an orchard behind that, cherry orchard. You ought to see the cherry trees. Well, when I was trimming the edges near the kitchen door, the cook came and watched me. She's a fat Irish woman. Henry laughed at the recollection. She asked me if I liked cookies. Oh, if you had smelled them baking, you'd have died laughing, Benny. Delicious. So I said I did, and she passed me out one, and when she went, I put it back. I put it in my pocket. He must be on call. Did she see you? Asked Jess anxiously. Oh, no, said Henry confidently, for I carefully chewed away for a long time on nothing at all. Benny began to look fixedly at Henry's pocket. It certainly was still rather bulgy. When I went, the doctor paid me $1, and the cook gave me this bag. Henry grinned as he tossed the paper bag to Jess. Inside were 12 ginger cookies with scalloped edges, smelling faintly of cinnamon and sugar. Oh my God, that smells so yummy. I love ginger cookies. I'm going to keep track of everything I earn and spend, said Henry, watching Jess as she handed around the cookies with reverence. How are you going to write without a pencil? Asked Jess. There are pieces of tailor's chalk in my work bag, said Violet. Henry gave his younger sister a gentle pat as she returned with her work bag and fished for the chalk. Cinnamon and ginger, yes. Cinnamon, ginger, molasses, all of that. Oh, so good. I like the old-fashioned cookie. I'm an old soul. Henry gave his younger sister a gentle pat as she returned to her with her work bag and fished for the chalk. While the girls rinsed the empty dishes in the brook and stored away the food for supper, Henry was beginning his cash account on the wall of his bedroom. It was never erased, and Henry often looks now at the account with great affection. Um, it depends on how it's done, really. They can compete with each other and be too much, but it depends on the quantities that you put in. Like, and like ginger cookies with like a dusting of cinnamon on them is really delicious too. Or like cinnamon sugar on a ginger cookie. Delicious. Soon the girls came to inspect it. Meanwhile, Benny looked on with great delight as Watch tried to bury his bone with only one paw to dig with. Earned $1. Cash on hand $3.85, read Jess aloud. Below he had written milk 24 cents, bread 10 cents, bread 20 cents, cheese 10 cents, milk 24 cents, beef 20 cents, bone 5 cents, cloth 10 cents. Cloth, exclaimed Violet. What on earth? Henry laughed a little and watched her face as he drew out his last package and handed it to her. I thought we ought to have a tablecloth, he explained, so I got a yard at the 10-cent store, but it isn't hemmed, of course. With a cry of delight, Violet unwrapped the brown cloth with its edge of blue. Her clever fingers were already evening the two ends. She was never so happy as when with a needle. Henry set off again with a light heart. Here was one sister curled up happily against a big tree, setting tiny stitches into a very straight hem. Here was another sister busily gathering pliant twigs into a bundle for a broom with which to sweep the stray pine needles from the house. And here was Benny, curled up sound asleep on the ground with the dog for a pillow. It was quite late when Henry returned. In fact, it was nearly 7 o'clock, although he didn't know that. Several treasures had been added in his absence. The broom stood proudly in the corner with a slim stick for a handle. The new tablecloth had been washed and was drying on the line. And Jess, who had decided to wash one garment a day, had begun with Benny's stockings. When Henry came, they were being put on again with much pride by Benny himself. Violet had darned a big hole in each. This time Henry himself could not wait to tell his sisters what he had. He passed them the package at once with shining eyes. Butter! Cried Jess with a radiant face. It was butter, cool and sweet. Nobody remembered that they had been a week without tasting either butter or meat when at last they sat down to their royal supper. These are trick spoons, explained Henry. Turn them upside down and use the handle and they become knives. They were knives. Anyway, they were used to spread the delicious morsels of butter on the brown loaf. With dried beef and a cookie for dessert, who could ask for better fare? Certainly not the 4 children, who enjoyed it more than the rarest delicacies. I washed the doctor's automobile this afternoon, Henry related. Then I washed both piazzas with the hose, and tomorrow I'm going to hoe in the garden. Oh, wouldn't I love to have a nice cold swim in that brook? Henry was hot and sticky, certainly. He looked with longing eyes at the waterfall as he finished the last crumbs of his supper. I wonder if we couldn't fix up a regular swimming pool, he said, half to himself. Of course we could, replied Violet, as if nothing were too difficult. Jess and I know where there are big logs and big flat stones. You do, hey? Said Henry, staring at his gentle little sister. Well, why couldn't we, Henry? Struck in Jess. Just a little below this there's a sort of pool already, only not big enough. We sure could, cried Henry. Some day I'll stay home from work and we'll see. Nobody realized that Henry had been working only one day in all. Anyway, it seemed as if they had always lived in the comfortable home in the freight car, with Henry plying back and forth from the city each day, bringing them new surprises. When Henry went to bed that night with a head full of plans for damming up the brook, he almost shouted when he thought suddenly of Benny's wheels. He began to plan to make a cart to carry the heavy stones to the brook, and that was when he first noticed that Watch was not asleep. He could see his eyes shining red in the darkness. It must have been around 11 o'clock. Henry reached over and patted his rough little back. Watch licked the hand but didn't close his eyes. Suddenly he began to growl softly. Shh, said Henry to the dog. Now thoroughly startled, he sat up. Jess sat up. They did not hear a sound. Better shut the door, breathed Henry. Together they rolled the door very slowly and softly until it was shut. Still they did not hear anything. but still Watch continued his uneasy growling. Violet and Benny slumbered on. Jess and Henry sat motionless with their hearts in their mouths. "Supposing it was some other tramp," whispered Jess. "Hi, Ritzka, how are you?" "Somebody else that wanted to sleep here." "Watch would bite him," whispered Henry briefly. Jess never knew what confidence Henry had in the faithful dog. Then a branch cracked sharply outside, and Watch barked out loud. Jess smothered the dog instantly in her arms, but it had been a bark, and it was loud, clear, and unmistakable. "That settles it," thought Henry. "Whoever it is knows there's someone in here." And the boy waited with the new broom in his hand, expecting every moment to see the door opened from the outside. But nothing happened, nothing at all. The children sat in perfect silence for at least a half hour, and nothing more was heard. Watch sniffed a little when Henry finally rolled the door open again. But he then turned around 3 times and lay down beside Jess, apparently satisfied at last. Taking the dog's conduct as a sure guide, Henry composed himself for sleep. "It must have been a rabbit or something," he said to Jess. The occupants of the freight car slept peacefully until morning. "Doing good. The day's been stressful." "Oh no." "I'm sure you passed." "I'm sure you passed." "Of course you did. It'll be wonderful." At home. Jess and Henry had a short committee meeting next morning before the others awoke. It was agreed that nobody should be allowed to stray off into the woods alone, not even the dog. With much mystery, Henry left some orders with all of them as to what they should build for him during the morning. I like how it says, "Don't wander off alone," but Henry's definitely going off alone. "What for?" asked Benny. "Shan't tell, old fellow," teased Henry. "You just build it, and you'll see later." So Henry walked briskly through the woods, feeling sure that the noise in the night had been made by Rabbit. Having no watch, Henry made a slight mistake by appearing at the young doctor's door before 8 o'clock. He was just in time to meet the doctor coming in from a night call. If Henry had not been so eager to begin work, he would have noticed how the young man's dark eyes examined him from head to foot, even to his plastered hair wet with brookwater. It was not the doctor who directed his work, but the doctor's mother, the sweet-faced Mrs. McAllister, whose heart was centered in her son and her vegetable garden. Her heart warmed to the boy when she saw how carefully he thinned out the carrots, which had been sadly neglected. "I have been so busy," she declared, "that I have actually stayed awake nights worrying about these carrots. There, see that?" She pulled out a fairly good-sized carrot as she spoke. It had to come out, for it was much too near its neighbors. In fact, when Henry had thinned out half a row, he had quite a little pile of eatable carrots, each as large as his thumb. When Mrs. McAllister saw Henry deftly press the earth back again around the carrots which remained standing, she left him quietly with a smile. Here was a gardener whom she could trust. Henry worked steadily in the hot sun, completing row after row of carrots, parsnips, and onions. When the mill bells rang at noon, he worked on, without noticing that his employer was again watching him. When he did at last notice her, he asked her, smiling, what she wanted done with the things he had pulled up. "Oh, throw them away," she said indifferently. "Toss them over into the orchard, and sometime we'll burn them when they get dry." "Do you mind if I take them myself?" asked Henry hesitatingly. "Oh, no," said Mrs. McAllister cordially. "Have you chickens? That will be fine." Henry was thankful that she went right along without waiting for an answer. But in a way, he did have chickens, he thought. "You must stop working now," she said. "Any time you want to do something, there will be a place for you here." She gave him a $1 bill and left the delighted boy with the piles of precious little vegetables. As long as Henry expected to be returned so soon, he hastily selected an orderly bunch of the largest of the carrots and the smallest of the onions. He added a few of the miniature parsnips for good measure. They looked like doll's vegetables. When Henry walked down the drive with his bouquet, he would have seen a face at the window if he had looked up, but he did not look up. He was too anxious to get to the little old man's shop and order his meat. And now that I think about it, $1 a day for this work for a kid is wild at this time. Let's see, 1920 wage. Oh, actually, no, it's actually pretty cheap. Thank you for the hydrate. Um, okay, so like industrial workers were making 56 cents an hour. So Filipino sugar workers in Hawaii, however, were making $1 a day. So if he's working um if he's working 7 days a week, that's $7 a week. That could buy him quite a bit. And considering they're kids, they have no utilities or anything. They could get by well enough and even have some savings. So it happened that Henry walked in upon his little family at about 2 o'clock with all the materials for a feast, especially if he's getting some of that vegetable subsidized. The feast could not be made ready before night, Jess hastened to explain to Benny, who was perfectly satisfied anyway with bread and milk in his pink cup. Your building is done, Benny informed his brother. I builded lots of it. He really did, agreed Violet, leading the way to the sunny open spot a trifle behind the house. The building was a fireplace. With an enormous amount of labor, the children had made quite a hollow at the base of a rock. This was lined completely with flat stones. More flat stones had been set on end to keep out the wind. On top of the stones lay the most wonderful collection of firewood that you could imagine, all ready to light. There were chips and bits of crumpled paper, pine cones, and dry twigs. Beside the big rock was a woodpile. The children had apparently been working like beavers all the morning. Thank you for the lurk. Love you too. Jess had found a heavy wire in the dump and had fastened it between two trees. On the wire the kettle swung merrily. Fine, fine, shouted Henry when he saw it. I couldn't have done it so well myself. And he honestly believed it. We have dinner at night here, observed Jess impressively. What did you buy? When the girls saw the tiny vegetables, they began with cries of delight to cut them from their stalks with Henry's knife and broken paring knife. They scrubbed them in the wash tub, filled the kettle half full of water from the well, and proceeded in great excitement to cut the raw meat into cubes. When this had been dropped into the kettle, Henry lighted the fire. It burned frantically, as if it were trying to encourage the stew to do its best. Violet laid the tin plate over the top for a cover, and they all stood by to hear the first bubble. Soon the savory stuff in the kettle began to boil in good earnest. Watch sat down gravely near it and gave an approving sniff at intervals. Keep boiling, advised Henry as he departed. When I come home tonight, I'll bring some salt. And for mercy's